wondered how they create these great fancy ruffles. You see them a lot on evening wear, shawls, scarves. It's really pretty simple, and we're going to do it all on the Baby Lock fiber. The first thing that we're going to do is make sure that we are set up for a 3-thread rolled edge. Now I've placed a standard overlock thread in my needle. I do have a texturized nylon thread. You would want to use something like that or a decorative thread in your upper looper because you want it to be pretty. You're using such a pretty fabric, you should have a pretty thread. And then we're going to use just a regular overlock thread in that lower looper. Because we're in a rolled edge, we need to make sure that we're on the R setting and our stitch length, and we need to make sure that we've taken out our stitch finger. Now, I stitched or did a test stitch on my fabric ahead of time, so I know that my tension settings are all set. So I did have to adjust my needle, I did adjust my upper looper, and I did adjust my lower looper tension. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take fishing line, and this I've got is 25-pound test, and we're actually stitching over this. The second thing that I've done is I've cut this fabric on the bias, and what's going to happen is when I pull, the bias will stretch and the fishing line will help create or define those edges. The first thing I need to do is feed the fishing line through the presser foot, and I am using the standard presser foot. If you look at the very top of the presser foot towards the back, towards the needle, there's a small hole there, and that's actually what I'm going to feed my fishing line through. It just makes it easier to hold that fishing line in place when I'm doing that, and I think it's easiest to do it with the presser foot off. So we're going to take that presser foot off, and then we'll feed the fishing line through that hole. You can see that hole right there, and I'm going to slide it to the back, and I'm going to hang on to it in the front and the back. And what this does, like I said, is it guides that fishing line where I need it to be, because it's going to be caught in that stitch. Set that up, lower that presser foot, and we're set. And you can see, if you look in your window, you should see that fishing line lining up right there by that needle. Now I do take a couple of stitches, usually by hand, to secure that fishing line so that I know that it's being caught. Now my blade is up, and that's the other reason I use this hole, is it keeps the fishing line away from the cutting blade, so I know that I'm not going to cut the fishing line. I do not want to cut that fishing line. Place our fabric underneath the presser foot, and we're just going to trim off ever so slightly, just a little bit of fabric. I don't want to trim off a whole lot. And then, because I have no fabric back here, I'm going to hang on to that fishing line on the back side for a little bit of tension until my fabric gets caught, and then I'm just going to stitch away. Let's pull that just a little bit just to help it out underneath that presser foot. There we go. And we're just going to keep stitching. I do find that I have to watch that this fishing line sits over this groove. You won't see much happening as you're stitching, other than the edges may curl just a little bit. It's always wise to check the back of your stitch to make sure that your tension is okay. And as I come to the end of this, what I'm going to do is, just for security reasons, I stitch out onto my fabric, and then at this point I'm going to cut a little extra fishing line. I just do it because I want to make sure that if my stitch happens to move, it moves across that fishing line, so I'm not losing any of my ruffle. So I'll just stitch that off with that fishing line. When I come to the end, I'm going to just trim those threads. So I've finished sewing, and as I said, I like to leave a little bit extra of the fishing line, because the first thing that I do is I start at the top and I just kind of smooth out my stitching across that fishing line. And sometimes what I'll find is that my fabric actually shifts a little bit. Now this doesn't, it's got a little bit of wave, but it doesn't have that real pretty wave. All you're gonna do is simply pull your fabric on that bias and see how beautiful those edges turn, look at how stunning that edge is. Just continue to pull all the way down your piece, and then you have these beautiful rolls in your fabric, and that fishing line helps define those curves. So this is how easy it is to create this stunning edge on the Baby Lock Vibrant using a rolled edge and fishing line.